Hey y'all, welcome. Our event tonight is brought to you because some friends from CNET, which is Christian Education Network, and Kathy Hanna is one of the co-chairs of that group. We wanted to give you an opportunity to hear from a friend to the diocese, Aaron Brittain. Full disclosure, Aaron and I have known each other for a spell, but I'm still going to read his official bio because, we want to make sure that we're hitting the good parts. So let me share with you that Reverend Aaron Brittain has a BA in Religion and International Relations from Berry College and a Master's of Divinity from Baptist Theological Seminary at Richmond. He's pastored Baptist churches for 21 years in the Hampton Roads area. I will say most recently, just down the road from Ascension at Talbot Park Baptist, which is our churches did a lot of things together, along with another church, Bible studies, worship, things like that. So he's been a friend in many, many ways. And he's a former GraceInside board member who's now turned staff member. He joined the staff as Director of Operations just recently in January 2026. So, my friend, I will turn it over to you. We are happy to have you here. And thank you for letting us record it so that we can share this with other folk on the CNET website. That's where it'll live on the CNET site of the Diocese of Southern Virginia webpage. All right, I'm going to mute myself and watch the
Hey, I'm
chat.
gonna mute myself.
Hey, Susan, we're just getting started. All right, Aaron, off to you. And do you need, you should be able to still share if you need to share slides or anything.
Yeah, I'm good. Well, thank you, Lynn. Thank you, everybody. I appreciate the invitation to share tonight. And as Lynn said, we've been buddies a long time. And I am Baptist born and raised, but I have some streaks of Episcopal in me. So I was a youth minister at an Episcopal church for a year when I was a senior in college. That was St. Peter's in Rome, Georgia. And so I like to tell people that I was a youth minister at St. Peter's in Rome, which is honest, but the Georgia part is also part of that. So I'm going to come back to that later on in the conversation because the way I'm thinking about this is tell you a little bit about who I am and GraceInside, what we do, because some of you are probably not as familiar with that. And then I want to shift maybe in the second half and have some conversation about how I see what I do and what we do as fitting into Christian formation, because I think there's a lot of really fruitful stuff to talk about. So, as Lynn just told you, up until last November, I had been the pastor at Talbot Park Baptist Church in Norfolk for 14 years. I had been a pastor at other churches before that, and just felt like it was time for me to try something new, that God was calling me to something different. So wound up taking the position as the director of operations for GraceInside, which is what I'm doing now. GraceInside is the nonprofit organization that oversees all of the state prison chaplains in Virginia. So just the state prisons. That does not include jails. That does not include federal prisons. Until I entered this world, I knew, I will say, probably very little about this world of prisons and jails. And I didn't even understand really what's the difference between that. A jail is a local place, people are held there temporarily. Prisons are places where people go to have a longer sentence. Um, and so Virginia is unique in a lot of ways, but one of the ways is that Virginia is the only state that does not have state employees who are prison chaplains. Every other state has chaplains, but they pay them as state employees. In Virginia, that was deemed to be a violation of church and state. And even though the state pays for chaplains at mental hospitals and other places like that, they said, no, we're not going to do it. And so back in 1920, a group of 7 denominations came together and said, we need to address this need. At that time, there were 2 state prisons. There are now 38 different prisons around Virginia, or different kind of work camps and facilities. But a group of pastors in Richmond said, we need to minister to the prisoners. And so that group of 7 denominations, which included Baptist and Episcopalians, so y'all were on it right from the start, uh, Presbyterians, Lutherans, Methodists, Quakers, and Disciples of Christ. So it started ecumenically. It's been an interfaith organization, ecumenical organization ever since 1920. So we're talking now 26 years, 106 years that GraceInside has been in existence. And as I just mentioned, in that time frame, we've expanded, unfortunately, from 2 prisons in the state to 38. So now there are roughly 22 to 23,000 inmates in Virginia state prisons at this moment that we're speaking. And I am not an expert in incarceration, so I may be able to answer some of your questions about that. I'll just give that disclaimer up front, but I think it is important to set a little context in the conversation about this, because when I talk to folks, and a church group is a little different, but sometimes I don't think folks realize some of the statistics around incarceration. So it's like 1 in every 540 citizens in the United States is incarcerated. It's an incredibly high percentage. We're in the top 10 nations in the world, along with such wonderful places like North Korea, Iran, Cuba. That's a list we don't want to be on in terms of the percentage of our people who are behind bars. And part of what that means is that in every community, every city, every school, every church, there are people who were formerly incarcerated, people who have family members who are currently incarcerated or will be incarcerated. So I know all of you, whatever context you are currently in, I would wager that you all know someone who has been in prison at some point. And if you don't, you have known someone who's been in prison. You just didn't realize that you knew someone who's been in prison. Uh, the statistic that most amazed me when I started this work is that between 90 and 95% of people who are inmates in Virginia prisons will be released at some point. So out of that 23,000 number I just gave you, most of those people will at some point be integrated back into society. So you are shopping with these people at Harris Teeter. You are worshiping with these people every Sunday. They are in your book clubs. And they don't wear signs that are flashing neon lights that say, I used to be in prison, right? But I think that's part of the context of this work, is to realize these are our friends and neighbors. These are our family members. These are people that, and again, in a lot of cases, we don't know that backstory or that history. But in many cases we do. And as a pastor, I certainly over the years had church members who were incarcerated, family members that I visited. So I think it intersects in those ways, but it's also beneath the surface in a lot of ways that and reentry and reintegration into society. That's a whole other big topic that we could spend a lot of time talking about. And there's a lot of good organizations doing work about that. GraceInside doesn't really do much with that because we're focused on the time that is spent with inmates in the prison setting. And so I think my idea of a prison chaplain before I started this was that they are somebody who comes in and leads a worship service on Sunday morning for the inmates, and maybe leads some Bible studies and kind of serves as the pastor of the inmate population. That is, I would say, the smallest tip of the iceberg as to what prison chaplains do. That is a part of their work, but in many, if not most, prison settings, it is either volunteers or the inmates themselves that lead worship services. So it's not the chaplain every Sunday getting up preaching. It's church groups that come in on a rotational basis and lead worship. with the pastor from those churches preaching, or inmate-led worship services. And so there's in many prisons, there's an inmate pastor, there's inmate elders or inmate deacons, there's an inmate band uh, and choir. And so the chaplain is there to coordinate that and oversee that, but not necessarily to lead that. Um, and a lot of the work a chaplain does is administrative. So there's a lot of paperwork involved with every religious program and activity that happens. The chaplain is kind of the liaison between the correctional system and the inmates. And so it's an interesting place to be because, on the one hand, all of our chaplains that we hire have to abide by all the safety regulations, everything that happens in prison, which y'all can imagine is uh, very, there's so many hoops to jump through. At the same time, they're trying to compassionately care for these inmates. Um, and it just depends on which prison you're in some prisons, in some settings, again, I had a impression that all of the Department of Corrections staff would be kind of gruff and mean and tough, and some of them are, and some of them aren't. But prison, as you, uh, what I have told people is, since I have been doing this, I've now been to maybe 11 or 12 of the 38 around the state in the past 6 months since I started. It is in many ways like you imagine. It's a hard place. There's a lot of barbed wire. Um, it is designed to dehumanize people. At the same time, I will say the services that I've attended and the conversations that I've had with some of the inmates have been some of the most hopeful, encouraging, life-giving experiences that I've had in ministry. And I wish that every person from what we call the outside church could be a part of the church inside, which is what we call it. It's because it's God is not absent from the prison, and Grace Inside really takes this posture that we are being sent by the church. Our chaplains go into places where most people can't go to do work that almost no one else can do to the most vulnerable population, a group that Jesus specifically says, when you care for these people, you're caring for me. So it's work that we take seriously in that sense. Um, but the experience, rather than being depressing or gloomy, is these are guys and some women, but mostly men, who are in a very difficult place, and yet I have seen hopeful. I went to a baptism service a few months ago where 23 guys were baptized. Bearded, heavily tattooed, the whole prison image. And people have asked me, well, aren't these guys just, this is a jailhouse conversion? They're just trying to, they're pretending so that they can act well and get out sooner. And I said, well, A, um, it's no one's place to judge what's authentic and not, right? Because I'm aware that there are people sitting in every one of our pews on Sunday morning, and they may not be there for authentic reasons, but I'm not judging that, right? But I don't know who is there or what decisions they're making for what reasons. B, even if they are pretending, it's better for them to pretend to be good than to actively be bad. So everyone has a stake. The DOC staff, the wardens, and the public at large wants people who are in prison to transform their lives. They want folks to come out. All of us want people to come out and lead productive lives. We don't want them to continue to commit crimes, right? But in addition to that, people who are in ministry and in the church, we want people to really find a peace and an experience of Christ that is transformative. And so that's what our chaplains are doing, but they're doing that through mainly a ministry of presence, because they are professional chaplains, which means they are chaplains for every person in the prisons that they serve, whether they are Christian, Muslim, Jehovah's Witness, Buddhist, or atheist. So just like if you went into the hospital and you had a chaplain come around to your room, they're going to take care of you. It doesn't matter what your faith is, right? So that's the same way our chaplains serve. They're not there to proselytize. They're not there to convert people. They are there to help in any way that they can. For the Christian inmates, they are there to help specifically in terms of worship and counseling. But for other inmates, they're there to help them, the resource, their Muslim services, to get information about. One of the things that was very eye-opening to me, there are 40 approved religions in the prison system, things that you have never heard of, things that I had never heard of, some of which only exist in prison, groups that only exist in prison. The Church of Satan is one of those. So we have our chaplains, who are all Christians, help the Church of Satan members if there are inmates in their facility who claim that that is their religion, then that's part of their responsibility. So to me, when I step back and think about our work, um, some of folks really wrestle with that tension between, well, I'm here as a Christian, and yet I'm supporting all these people of different faiths, and sometimes of no faith. To me, that is much more Christ-like, because when Jesus was ministering, before he fed the 5,000, he didn't say, "Hey, raise your hand if you believe in me. All right, the rest of you go over here. You don't get anything." When Jesus was healing people, he said, "Okay, let me have your theological statement." There is no. So to me, chaplains act as the presence of Christ, whether they are explicitly preaching or teaching from the Bible or proselytizing. I see those as different things. And our chaplains are a great group of folks who come from all different denominational backgrounds, men and women, and almost all of them are part-time. Some of them are serving in multiple facilities. Some of them are serving as pastors of churches and doing this. So it's a real mix of folks. A lot of the prisons are in very rural locations, because not only to isolate the prisoners, but also Virginia built prisons in rural places so that rural populations would have jobs. And so a lot of our chaplains drive 2 or 3 hours a day back and forth to places to commute. And a lot of the prisons in Virginia are way out in the western part of the state. I've visited some of the places that I never knew existed in Virginia until I started this job. So I appreciate the work that our chaplains are doing. That was a lot. So I'll stop there for a minute. Do y'all have questions about GraceInside or prison chaplaincy in general?
So Aaron, I'm assuming that, so there's several levels of engagement, right, between the chaplains and then other volunteers, right? Are you going to get to other volunteer options as well?
Yeah, yes, yeah,
Okay.
I will. But yeah, so really, I think the best analogy is that the chaplain is serving as the pastor in the system, and then the volunteers are the laity, and the laity has to do most of the work. Most of the work is carried out by the volunteers in the prison system, and so depending on which prison you're talking about, there may be a big group of volunteers or a smaller group, but the chaplain really coordinates with those folks, encourages those folks, recruits those people from local churches or nonprofit groups to come in and help. The chaplain still has kind of a authority or overseeing function, in the sense that if someone comes in from an outside group and starts preaching or teaching something that is really out of a very, we try to stick to the basics. So if we had somebody come in and say, well, y'all need to believe that you have to be immersed to be baptized, to be saved, for example, we would say, no, you can't preach that in here, right? Our chaplains have that authority to say, we got to stick to certain, because there's a wide variety of prisoners and they're preaching to So the volunteers that come in, they do have to go through a background check and screening from the Department of Corrections. So there is a process to that. Some of you may be familiar. Any of you know about Kairos? Yeah, so Kairos is probably the best known organization that comes in they partner with our chaplains. They do 4-day weekends is their big thing, which is they come and have a whole program that they go through, and volunteers come in to do that. Our chaplains may or may not be a part of that. They help oversee that, but there are a lot of uh, organizations, nonprofits. Prison Fellowship is another big one that comes in. They lead classes and have an academy at some prisons and do things that are totally separate from GraceInside, but the chaplain is the person in the prison who oversees that.
Well, it looks like Dana has a question.
Yeah.
So,
Well, I wanted to say that I've been a hospital chaplain and I've been a Virginia Beach police chaplain. So, two things. I was kind of interested in talking about chaplaincy and the prisons, and I'm also a deacon at St. Stephen's in Newport News. So, talking about what the church can do and the laity can do. Yeah, I just wanted to let you know the positions I had been in as chaplains and
Yeah,
been
so
in the
you know what it's
police.
like to have to care for people of all faiths or no faith.
Yeah, and in the police department, that was a position of, you never knew who you were going to be dealing with, and going down, taking them to jail. So, yeah, I'm a little familiar with the jails down in the Virginia Beach area. Yeah, I live in
Yeah,
Hampton now.
the our chaplains also, they minister to the staff as well. So
Mhm.
that's another tension that exists. I think we see our constituency primarily as the inmates because they have no one else who can represent them. But the reality is, today our chaplains interact with a lot of the staff members, and a lot of those folks are also in need of help. So
mhm.
that there's a lot of ministry that goes on that way. But yes, Dana, I am going to talk in just a minute a little bit more about specifics about how you can get involved in church stuff. But anybody have any more questions about GraceInside? One statistic I didn't mention that I like to tell everybody: Virginia has the lowest recidivism rate in the country, which I had never known. I mean, I've lived here for 26 years now. Uh, so it's about 18% in Virginia, the number of people who reoffend after they're released from prison. That's a good statistic. I think our governors and our politicians should talk about that statistic more. Somebody should take credit for it. I've never heard anybody talk about that much, but part of the reason that I think that is because Virginia really does, as a whole, there are exceptions to this rule, but I think generally speaking, really attempts to um, work with the inmates while they are in prison so that in a variety of ways they are prepared when they're released. Part of that is by having good chaplains, but part of that is through a whole series of things that, again, I was totally ignorant of. For example, it is the law in Virginia that every prisoner, while they're incarcerated, has the opportunity to complete their GED if they had not done so or gotten a high school diploma before they were incarcerated. Did y'all know that? I didn't know that. So in every prison, there is essentially several classrooms where teachers come in and teach uh, inmates who choose to participate. No one's forced to do that, but hopefully everybody who once you're released, they should have had the opportunity at a minimum to receive a high school diploma equivalent. Um, 70 to 75% of people who are incarcerated in Virginia are reading at a third grade level. So that tells you a lot right there about the connection between education, poverty, and incarceration. When I went to visit Deerfield, which is right off 58 near Emporia, the billboard was that she had outside her classroom um, was Dr. Seuss because that's what they're reading to the inmates there because that's the reading level they're at. So um, there's training programs, there's work programs. So I think Virginia as a whole is a really good place. And there's something called the Virginia model, which is built on the assumption that if you treat prisoners with more dignity and respect, that will benefit everyone. Uh, and so uh, that is being slowly implemented across the state, there's a few places where that's already started. And so in those institutions, the inmates are given better food, better mattresses, more privileges about how they can move and when they can move, with the knowledge that that's a responsibility. And if they violate one of the rules, then they're going to lose those privileges and have to move to another facility. And those places that I have been in that have that, it's night and day difference between the places that don't. And so, you know, that is really, they're not the state of Virginia is not doing that because they're motivated by anything religious. But to me, that is um, a very Jesus thing, that we treat people with dignity and worth. And so I was pleasantly surprised to find all that out about Virginia. Um, any more questions about that? Yeah, Sarah.
But
Do you do get involved in legislation at all? And promoting it? I just recently was had written about solitary confinement in the prisons in Virginia because we're one of the few systems that still has solitary confinement.
Yeah, we don't because we are in a interesting spot in between. So 2/3 of our funding for the prison chaplains comes from the commissary fund. So we're not paid directly by the state, but we are paid through the commissary fund, which is what the money the prisoners or inmates give for special privileges. So part of the way our chaplains are funded is through this. So we're contracted officially by the Department of Corrections. Um, so we walk on this tightrope of not wanting to offend the Department of Corrections and abide by their rules, because at any time they could say, we're throwing you all out and you have no access. And they have done that at points in the past. Um, but also pushing back where we can to say, and when we notice things that are not right, to say, how do we address this? So one of the GraceInside employees actually works at the Department of Corrections office. We have a GraceInside employee who is there all the time working with those folks just on that stuff, kind of as a liaison. But it's not really lobbying and doing legislative stuff. It's just so that we have a presence. So we're kind of in that odd space of I think our chaplains are always advocating for inmates, and I think that is part of our work. But as far as publicly doing that as an organization, we have not done that historically.
Do you also visit people in the solitary?
Yeah, yeah. So chaplains are the only people who have access to those folks. That's one of the and it is law. I mean, an inmate cannot be denied their religious freedom just because you're in prison. So there are a number of laws about um, how often a prisoner is able to have access to religious service or a chaplain or something like that. And during COVID screwed up so many things. It was horrible for prisons. And during that time, a lot of our chaplains lost access. A lot of programs were shut down. Places that were used to having worship services and Bible studies once or 2 or 3 times a week completely stopped. And it's just now really coming back to what it was, where some of those folks are able to participate more. But yes, our chaplain, in fact, we have 2 or 3 chaplains that we've hired just to go to solitary units. It's called RHU now, restorative housing. That's the euphemism that is now used for solitary, Sarah. But yeah, so and a lot of the times that's just conversing through a door because that's the only access they have, but they're at least able to get in there and do that where no one else can.
Thank you.
All right. Well, I want to talk a little bit about church and what we can do and formation maybe. And Lynn and I have been having some of these conversations because as a pastor, I'm always thinking from the church end. And when I go talk to church groups and they say, we didn't know about this work at all, or we were kind of aware, but how can we be involved? How can we participate in this? I think there's a variety of obvious and immediate ways. One of which is uh, pray for the chaplains, ask me or the chaplains to come speak in your congregations to talk about the work that's going on, which we're always happy to do. Um, the Diocese of Southern Virginia, the Diocese of Virginia, and the Diocese of Southwestern Virginia all support us financially, and we have good relationships with the bishops and are regularly talking about how we can work together. One of the ideas that has come out of that I'm hopeful about is the possibility of having deacons serve as chaplains. Um, the diaconate in the Episcopal Church, they're called to be in the world, right? That's the terminology. So um, I think that is going to increasingly be a place where we see collaboration. And I think to me, this is a bigger question of what does Christian formation look like in a 21st century church? I think that more and more it's going to have to be outside of the walls of the building that we're doing formation. It's not an either or, it's a both and. But I think the old model of we come to the building, we have Sunday school or Christian education hour, we do godly play, we do these things, and then everybody goes out to their real lives for the rest of the week. If we can get them in the buildings for that hour or two, which is hard enough, that is not a bad thing, and it was very successful for a long time. I think increasingly we're going to have to find ways to engage folks and form folks outside the walls of the building, and I think that looks like doing and being active in the world in ministry ways, and connecting what's happening inside the walls of the church with what's going outside. So I see that diaconate role as being part of that. Another big thing we are just getting off the ground at GraceInside is connecting to seminaries to start an internship program for people who are needing to fulfill either a CPE requirement or just need to do pastoral internship as part of their seminary training. Right now, we don't have that formal program, but in the past month, I've been in conversation with 4 different seminaries, including DTS and Alexandria, about getting this off the ground. Every one of the people that I talked to was very excited immediately, because part of what I said was the reality is that every congregation is shrinking, and the places that used to have 4 or 5 full-time paid clergy now have 1 or 2. The places that used to have 1 full-time clergy maybe can no longer even afford that 1. And so we need to find ways for people who are coming out of seminary to say, you can make a life and a career out of ministry. And part of what that may look like is having a part-time pastorate in an Episcopal church and serving as a prison chaplain. And so I think there's a lot of opportunity there for, we're already being supported in some ways financially by the Episcopal Church. And so it's natural to say, hey, we want to recruit from folks who have this calling. It's not for everyone, but give people an opportunity to come in and experience that for themselves, what that's like for a very intentional internship. And then if they feel called to that, pursue that. So I'm excited about that. I think that's a real way that we can see, and when the pastor is doing something other than just attending to the full-time needs of the congregation, if they're doing some of those outside things, I've seen that leach into the congregational life. So I'll use an example from my youth minister days, and we can talk about this. When I started, I was a babe in the woods. I was so young and so skinny back then, you wouldn't have recognized me today. And so I started out, and I had this group of this EYC, and I said, well, what do y'all want to do? So we made a list when I came in, and they said, these are the things we want to learn about. These are the things we want to do in the next year. One of those things was we want to learn more about other denominations. One of the things was we want to engage more in these kind of outside ministry projects. So rather than sit in a class for an hour on Sunday morning, I took that youth group to 8 different denominations, churches over the course of 2 or 3 months. We visited other churches. That's a much better way to find out what other churches are like and how they practice their faith than me having a big chart on the wall and saying, this is what Baptists do and this is what Presbyterians do. They loved it. The churches we visited loved it. One of the things we did was visit the local jail. And you want to talk about an eye-opening experience for 16, 17-year-old kids to be able to go. Now, of course, we had built that relationship with the jail there in Rome, Georgia. They, so they knew we were coming. And but to me, that is Christian formation, in maybe a slightly different way than we're used to thinking about. Because in the churches that I have been a part of, mission has always been very separated from formation, and I think that's maybe not great. And so I think part of my conversation tonight that I'm hoping we'll have is how we see those two things kind of bleeding into each other, and again, not to replace the traditional way of doing things, but to envision a different way so that, and especially that age group, I think wants to be doing things actively. And it was being able to visit those churches or being able to visit that jail with the group, I think was so much more formative than anything that I could have said or done in the building. So I'm just curious if y'all have had experiences like that or things that you've led in thinking about formation generally.
What we did at Ascension was not formation, but it was an accidental success story. There was a homeless man that came to the food pantry, and we connected with him. And he remained homeless, and he ended up at Deerfield, actually.
Hmm.
And some of us went to visit him, and people sent him cards and sent him the gift boxes. Well, Ascension became his church family. And when he was released, he went into one of these apartments. Well, there is a church that buys up houses where they house people that come out of prison. And he eventually reunited with his family. And they were in California. But I don't think that would have happened if we hadn't become his church family. And it was sort of an accidental thing that happened. Susan was James. I'm talking about James, if you remember that, and Lynn. And so and there was someone else who was released from prison, and some of us kept in touch with him just by text afterwards, so that there was a connection. Now, they never came to the church, but I mean, the feedback was, well, I had a church family, I had a family.
Yeah.
That's how they felt about it. So what I'm getting at is I wonder about pairing up parishes with people that don't have anyone, like in the city jail or in the prison, if that becomes a ministry that's possible.
And that is the kind of work that can only happen with volunteers and churches, because our chaplains, it would be considered fraternization for them to develop those kind of relationships one-on-one. So they always have to maintain that professional reserve, that there are strict rules. For example, if an inmate is released, they're not allowed to contact the chaplain after they're out.
Yeah.
They have to get special permission to even attend that person, if that chaplain's a pastor of a church. So there's a lot of rules about that. And that's part of why our chaplains have to be real careful. But churches and folks in churches can do that. And I will tell you, the number one thing that I see everywhere I go when I visit is these are folks who are desperately lonely. I mean, they are in an isolating place already, but I was talking to the first place I visited, I was talking to a guy who had been in prison for almost 40 years. He has never used a cell phone. And I said, having been in and out of all these different places, he hasn't been in and out, he's just been in. I said, what is the difference that you've seen between people who go out and come back in versus people who go out and stay out? And he said, it's community. It's people who have a network, and the network has to start while they're inside. They have to have resources, people that they trust, so that when they leave, they have a community to go to. And most of those people wind up in prison in the first place because they had no community, they had no family, they had no friend system. And there are people in prison who have never had a birthday party, never had a parent that they saw working, never had a parent that told them that they loved them, never had, I mean, a teacher who invested, go down the list of what we think of as normal human interaction from childhood. And so what I tell church groups is everybody has a gang. You and I just call our gang family or friends or church. A lot of people in prison have a literal gang, because if that is the only alternative for you to find community, humans are made to be in relationship with each other. And so we're going to find community, even if it's with people who are really doing horrible things. And that's how a lot of folks, I think, wind up in that situation, because that they are part of that community. So I do think that is something that churches, and of course, to go into a prison, you have to be a minimum of 18 to visit a prison. But we can also have groups that come in that are a part of the regular worship services to participate in that, but to write letters, to send care packages in the ways that are allowed, all that stuff. There's an angel tree program that folks on the outside can send presents to the inmates' families and children who that they're not able to do. So there's things like that, but that is such a huge thing. And there's a couple of places in Hampton Roads that do this for people who are getting out. But a lot of churches don't want former inmates, in their pews. And specifically, of course, sex offenders, that raises a whole other level of issues. But there are churches that are specifically ministering to those folks who are welcoming those folks and those communities. There's 2 or 3 different houses and apartment buildings in Norfolk and Chesapeake where formerly incarcerated people come and they sign a covenant. They live there together. They have some rules about how that life is structured. But churches can be a part of that work. And so I think there are but that's all once people are out, like I'm saying. So I think to establish those relationships while you're on the inside is key.
Aaron, can I ask a question? And this might be too removed from what we're talking about, but I'm thinking about our camp and retreat center that does this program or is the host for All God's Children, which is when kids come to camp for a week or 2 weeks, and it's only for children of incarcerated parents. Does GraceInside liaise with that kind of organization, or is that just completely separate?
We don't. No,
Okay.
I mean, what I'm hoping, because when I go to visit churches, the first question everybody asks is, how can we help? We want to be a part of this work. We are in the process of compiling a list of, and we already have on our website a list of some partners that we work with that you can go to and look at their organizations and what they're doing. But if I'm telling you that I have tried to find this information, and it is so, to my knowledge, there is no database or website anywhere that has a full list of state of Virginia. Here's the city. Here are the places that are doing this. And if you go to Department of Corrections, theoretically, there is a parole board in every municipality, and they have, I forget what the title is, but there's somebody that's supposed to be doing this work for the state to kind of connect people to resources once they get out. The reality is that some places that happens, some places it doesn't. That information is all out of date. And so even in Hampton Roads area, some of the groups that are doing this are totally unaware of what the other groups are doing. So I think it's beyond the purview of GraceInside to try and be the person who coordinates all that. But I would love at a minimum to just at least have that information together in one place so that we could be a resource
Yeah.
for groups that wanted to do that.
I mean, I think we have several people in this call alone who, work with youth, right? And, we're all, I think, always searching for ways to provide those meaningful interactions, right? Like from years of our two churches working together to do what used to be called Nest, right? There was that aha moment when teenagers had a chance to engage beyond what was on paper, right? To see people as human, right? Like you were going back to the respecting dignity and worth of a person, right? That resonates with our baptismal promises as Episcopalians. But we're always looking for ways to be able, especially with youth, to engage, right? So if there's letter writing or you mentioned like the angel tree kind of gifting things. How do they start with that? Do they reach out to you? Do they reach out to someone else at GraceInside to try to say, hey, I mean, most of the time they're not old enough to go in, right? But so it would have to be working through a church in some way to do some volunteer work. But how do they initiate that?
Yeah, they can always call me or email me, and then I would put them in touch with a chaplain that's at whatever prison is closest to them, and that chaplain would be the one who would best be able to say, "Here's what we need," or you know, we can send cards for some holiday or whatever it is that's coming up. There's some need, and so the chaplains would be the best ones at the local level. But I can make that connection if
I
people
mean,
are interested.
this sounds like a weird question, but like, I don't know if there was a youth group that wanted to take on, I don't know, sending birthday cards to inmates, right? Is there a list that, of course they wouldn't be signing their personal name from a safety standpoint, right? But is there a list so they could make those personal, right? So they could, instead of just happy birthday, but dear Aaron, happy birthday. I just wonder, is it are there opportunities to get that in the weeds, or is it a level or two removed in terms of being generic?
Yeah, the short answer is I don't know, but I would think, because I've known people who have had almost kind of pen pal relationships with, and you have to be careful about all this,
Sure.
obviously, especially when you're talking about youth. But I think if there were some guidelines that were laid down, I'm more concerned for, the prisons all have rules about, of course, what can get in, what can. But I think talking to the chaplains, they would know that and be able to say, yes, we could do, we could get you a list of um, the, the people who, are people who have requested contact, or I don't, there may be ways to make it more
Right.
personal, because I think the more personal it is, obviously, the bigger impact it's going to have in those kind of situations.
Sure.
And I don't know, how did James wind up? Was he already a part of Ascension?
No, I
We had a
think
food pantry, and he came into the food pantry.
Okay, 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 yeah.
That
Um,
somehow
and
that
then he connected with some key people, right? I know that several people connected very personally with him,
well,
right? It
people
wasn't
around
just one
town.
person.
No, the congregation, they would send him cards, and one of the things we learned was we did not put our addresses as a return address. We would put the church. We were told to do that. We put the church as the return address, and you just signed your name. And sometimes we'd send a card signed by lots of people, but individually people sent cards to him
right.
for birthday or just well, I guess it was well, no, just I mean every once in a while people would write to him. I don't know what would have happened to him if, I mean, we really became his family, and he never came to church. And there were lots of people that never met him.
Yeah,
And I think it was the saving grace. And the fact that he reunited with his family in California had a lot to do with his vision of his, yeah, vision of himself, because he had this family. And as I said, it kind of just happened sort of as, it built one thing built on another. It was not really planned, but I learned a lot from that.
Yeah, we had a person who was incarcerated while I was at Talbot Park, and um, they were the son of a former member. I never had known him well, but Karen Martin, some of you know, lovely Karen Martin, who's been in Talbot Park for many years, and she would write him pages of, I mean, 6 pages of handwritten letters, and he would mail back to her these same letters, asking questions about the Bible and just staying engaged with somebody. And then when he was released, he came back to Talbot Park because that's the only real family he had, the only connection he had had.
Loneliness is a killer.
Yeah.
Well, I mean, that's, so to have anybody that you connect with makes such a difference. The other thing that was surprising to me was James was an alcoholic, no surprise, but I would say to him, are you going to AA? And he's, no, the classes are full. Well, I called the prison and they answered me. And that's what surprised me. I mean, I just looked up the number and called the prison to find out about the AA meetings. But I was surprised. I immediately had a connection, got an answer. And he was shocked when he found out I called the prison.
Yeah. Well, and a lot of people are shocked just to find out that AA and NA exist in the prisons.
In the prison.
But they do.
The other
And
thing is he had a job and he got paid.
yeah.
He was in prison for 8 years, and when he got out, he had $700.
Yeah, Deerfield is really an exceptional. They they have a farm, a working farm. They have a fish pond that they stock and they raise fish. They have a greenhouse. They raise vegetables, and the inmates are allowed little plots where they raise their own stuff. So it's a better situation than a lot of other places. But
All that.
yeah, I, I think, Lynn, that would take some maybe figuring out, because if you have an pre-existing relationship, obviously it's a lot easier to maintain that connection. I think for people who are already in, figuring out a way to do that would not violate any rules.
Right.
It's,
Yeah, I mean, the reason I ask is, I probably anybody who's worked with youth will tell you that at some point in their tenure working with youth that, one of the things you did was kids sent cards to, to military personnel who were deployed, right? And there was always, Kathy's shaking her head, probably done that 30, 40 times. But I think when we do those kinds of things, it's not just here, do this, but there's some conversation about what this means, right? That, this is not just a piece of paper, right? And there's something powerful about engaging with the youth and saying, hey, before we send these off, let's all say a prayer over this, right? And it make them really intentional, I mean, holy notes, right? I mean, but the reason I ask it is because there are so many limitations for middle school and high school students to engage, period, right? Like, and there's huge safety issues, huge from a safety standpoint, but it would be interesting to try to explore possibilities. I know, from the diocese standpoint, when we look at a fall and spring EYC weekend, there's always some volunteer aspect, right? So that's why I raised it, just again, because several people on the call work with youth and work hard to try to make that connection about, our communities are made up of lots of different people, right? And our faith calls us to remember that there's redemption, there's forgiveness.
And I think the prison population specifically is a really overlooked and forgotten segment. Even in the church, as pastor of every church I've been in, we've had some kind of clothes closet. We've done something with hunger and feeding. We've done something with homeless, right? I mean, sheltering. Those have always been a part of every congregation I've ever been a part of. But the prison part of that, if it has been on the docket at all, it's usually one or two people in the congregation who kind of have that as their thing, and maybe they are passionate about that. But I think for a variety of, some obvious reasons why it's I think people are scared to talk about it. People are, or a lot of people in our pews may think these people deserve what they get, right? I mean, we would want to believe that we are people of redemption and forgiveness, like you just said, Lynn. But I think that is part of why we want to engage with this topic
Yeah.
and with this population specifically, because it really does bring into focus a lot of the things we say we believe on a regular basis, and it is a group that is specifically mentioned biblically many times for us to reach out to. So it's odd that in all those other ways we kind of have service and mission, but this group, it is harder in some ways to do it. But I feel like that's why we have to be even more intentional about making an effort to do it. So I've loved being a part of this work. To me, it is energizing to be, and don't take this as a slam. I think a lot of folks in the institutional church as it currently exists just take it for granted because we've always had it. It's always been there. People that I have experienced in the church inside, they don't take it for granted. and it's not all hell and brimstone kind of preaching. You need to get saved before you die. To become a Christian while you're incarcerated, you may still have 10 years or 20 years that you're going to be in prison. So then what does that mean for you? How does it make your life different, in other words? And so what I have found is that those inmates who have that transformation, it's because they are finding hope and peace in their life today. It's making a change in their experience today. It is a present reality in a way that maybe a lot of folks in the outside church just take for granted, or don't necessarily experience it in that same way. But that's the beauty of what I have seen doing this work is, the folks who are having these experiences, they're not there because they have to be. They're there because they want to be, and because even though they're not going to, I talked to this one guy. He's going to be in prison probably 6 or 7 more years. He said, when I get out, I want to come back and do this work and work with these guys to give them hope. And I feel like while I am here, this is my calling as a Christian, is to minister to these people and help them any way he can. And I thought, what kind of sane person would want to come back here after you get out, who spent all these years being in prison? And it made me cry to think about this. This inmate who, and he's teaching people Spanish, and he's helping, he's just trying to be a positive influence. So, to me, yes, if anyone in our churches could experience those kind of stories, I think it is great.
Yeah, it's making me think. I just this past weekend was at Richmond Hill, and for those of you, if you're not familiar with Richmond Hill, they pray 3 times a day for metropolitan Richmond. But the thing that I remember is last summer I was at an event and someone there who was a teacher, right? I mean, not someone incarcerated, but a teacher, and heard the prayers that they had for teachers in the school system, right? And they were so taken by the fact that somebody remembered them, right? And so I think that's a powerful thing, right? For anyone, but even more so when your privileges, your rights are restricted, and you are in a closed system that is highly regulated, right? To know that somebody is keeping you in prayer. I don't know that even for people who can't go in, I think that's a powerful opportunity. So that's what I would love to see what we could do. So
Yeah, me too. And I mean, as I said, we're rooted in the church. I mean, we see this as an expression of the church's word. And so, even though most people in churches can't physically be present, as much as this can be integrated into, because that's the reality, is this prison church is part of the Church Universal, the capital C Church. I mean, they are a part of us. Dana, I was just curious, when I was talking about the diaconate stuff, is that something that, how do you see that working or not working?
Yeah, I've been a vocational deacon for 14 years now. So, and being
Is an occasional deacon a specific title, like very right, or is that just a
oh, the
like
way
the
I
very
have it
right reverend, or
typed.
just the occasional deacon Dana? That's, I didn't know if that was a
Oh,
proper title.
yeah. So I did the hospital chaplaincy, and that was part of my CPE, even as a vocational deacon back when I went to school. We had to do for 400 hours. And then I came out and went to the police chaplaincy academy for, I think, years, and became a Virginia Beach police chaplain. So I rode in the car with a police officer. I was his partner. And so riding out into a lot of different situations and ending up at a jail. So when you were talking about it, because I had been thinking about this, I've called a couple of times and talked to some chaplains that were in the prison ministry about it. And it just is something that's been on my heart about being a chaplain in prison. And then when you had talked about that you were looking at maybe deacons looking at being chaplains, that was an outside ministry, because obviously as a vocational deacon, that is to get people out in the world, but also just as a chaplain, vocational deacon personally, the prison chaplaincy has been on my heart. And I know Lynn had typed in the chat that you've talked to Archdeacon Carter, about possible, what you had mentioned about deacons maybe being involved in this. So it's something I'd really like to look into. And then also what I can bring back to the church to be able to be more involved in finding things that are in the prison, like the lists of things that maybe we could do, and finding out more about what's available, what we can do as cards, what Lynn was talking about, other options. So very interested.
Yeah, great. Yeah, and that's, I, in the ideal world, I see it being a two-way street, right? It's not just us going to minister in the prisons; it's the prison and the inmates, how they minister to us and feed our church as
Oh,
well.
yeah.
And so I think the more we have folks from the outside church in prison, the more that those connections can grow and those relationships develop. So,
Yes.
Are there other questions, comments that you all have to either ask or share with Aaron? Aaron, have you covered what was on your list?
I I could always talk more, Lynn, but I have covered what's on my list. Yes, and I'm GraceInside is really at a point where we're trying to think more intentionally about these next few years, and specifically, as I mentioned, about how we recruit. And the reality has been that we've mainly had older folks, retired folks, people who have more flexibility, just because of the nature of the work. But we want folks to see this as a full-time vocational possibility. And so, that's something that I'm excited about. and talking to the seminaries and seeing what that looks like. And there's some seminaries that offer prison ministry tracks already, or they have a concentration where people are doing that. But I think the more that the local church can fill, you know, some my guess is that a lot of local Episcopal congregations probably don't know who GraceInside is, or are totally unaware that the diocese gives money to us on a regular basis. So just awareness is step one, but I think much more than awareness, engagement, and um, relationship. So yeah, I appreciate being able to talk. And
How do we
what
get?
is your name Sarah or is it Sally?
Yeah, it's really my given name is Sarah, but I've always been called Sally.
That's what I thought. I thought
Yeah,
Sally, and then I said,
yeah.
okay, all right,
It's very
yeah.
confusing because now that I'm older too, I have to give my official name for so many things that it confuses everybody.
Hey, Aaron, could you put your contact information in the chat so that if folks want to get in touch with you, um, they can't, right? Because the other piece is, when we think about the various formation calendars that we're scheduling, right? So there's always those opportunities to invite Aaron to come and talk for a forum or to talk to a youth group about, hey, that there are ways to be the church. There are lots of ways to be the church. And so,
And the chaplains to come, and they're more compelling than I am because they're doing this work. They have the firsthand experience and stories. So
right.
I'm just the old fuddy duddy in the office. But yeah,
But you
anytime.
can you can be the connector. See?
I can be the connector.
Um, I don't want to rush anybody, but I'm sensing that we're at a pausing point. But I want to make sure that that is in fact correct, both from Aaron and everybody who's on the call.
Just one thing I could quick add. I was actually, I had a meeting today at St. Stephen's with some of my head of my outreach, and we were going through different things that we might be looking at in the coming year. And I was going to set up a meeting for to see how many people in the congregation are interested in becoming part of the outreach committee to work on outreach and present it to the congregation. So this just gave me something else to talk to them about. So,
Great.
yeah. So I have it on my list. So I know it'll be brought up at my meeting.
And Susan asked me again to come back to Ascension. I had to turn you down in the spring because I had a conflict, but
Yes.
I'll come back. Yeah.
Yeah, I will. I know. I was trying to remember. Didn't he say he couldn't do it, or yeah,
Yeah.
or did
Y'all
I
asked me to
do it?
come on Mother's Day, actually, but I was already at another church. So yeah,
Yes.
we'll
I'll
find a time.
Yeah, we're having a meeting in August to we'll look at calendar dates and send out far out. Good, thanks.
Okay. Kathy, you've been very quiet.
Well, I'm getting ready to, I just started today to plan my youth group meetings for this, and I would love for you to come talk to them at one point. They've done, some of them have done a couple years ago. Megan did something with
Mhm.
Paris, and they really like that. And most of those kids have graduated, but I have a brand new bunch now. So
And Kathy, where are you serving?
Christ in St. Luke's.
Okay. Yeah.
Yeah, a few years ago, we had someone come and do a talk, and then they were
Cookies.
baking cookies. But they liked baking the cookies, but the conversation that was happening, right? And even the person who was presenting, talked to them about what, like, even like kind of held up a cookie and said, if you're in prison, you can't just walk into a kitchen and make a home baked cookie, right? And what do you think it means, right? And there was this very interesting connection that the kids had to, oh, this is not just an exercise, right? This is a meaningful way to connect with people, right? So and it was I can't think of who it was that talked. He wasn't from Grace Inside.
It was probably Kairos if they were doing the
Yeah.
cookies.
Yes,
Part of
it
what they
was
do.
from Cars, but I can't
Lee,
remember. I
was
can't
it Lee
remember his name.
Davis? Was it Lee Davis?
It might have been, right. But for
Yeah.
for the kids who were there, and we had a bunch of kids present, they watched the video and they really it resonated with them, right? That this wasn't just busy work, that this was a way to exercise one's faith in service to others, right? So I think, and anytime we can connect those dots from a formation standpoint, I think it's to the good.
Yeah.
All
Well,
right,
thank you all
y'all.
so
Well,
much.
I'm glad you're doing
hey, Aaron, you want to exercise that pastoral and send us out with a prayer?
I don't even have my book of collects here, but I'll do it anyway. So
Awesome.
All right, let's pray together. God, we are grateful for this group that has gathered tonight, and thank you for the good work that's going on in our prisons in your name. We pray for those who are incarcerated, and just pray that we will be faithful in remembering them as we remember you. Lord, we are excited and hopeful about possibilities of work that we can do together, and pray that you will stir us up and open our hearts and our imaginations to new possibilities. In Jesus' name, amen.
Amen.
Amen. Thank you.
All right.
Thank you.
Thanks all, Aaron. Thank you. Appreciate you as always.
Thank
I'm
you
gonna
all.
stop this
Thank you.
recording.
Bye.
Good to see
Bye.
everybody.